The Sonic the Hedgehog series has never been a stranger to letting its main character take a back seat to allow other characters the spotlight. As early as the 90s, we had spin-off games for Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Robotnik, and in more modern times, we've had games with Shadow the Hedgehog as the leading man, and a Knuckles TV show set in the movie universe, and of course, there exist comic book spin-offs. You might be more familiar with the various miniseries and one-shots put out by IDW featuring other characters, but today we're going to be taking it back to the mid-90s with the Archie Sonic spin-offs. There are only four technically, to speak of, and I think it would be interesting to look at all of them in one video, providing some explanations and reviewing them to see how good they are as spin-offs and just as comics in general. No time to waste, let's get on with it. Believe it or not, it was actually a Western character who got dibs on the first spin-off series from Archie, that being Princess Sally Acorn. The story of this series actually begins in issue 20 of the main Archie Sonic book, continued in a 3-issue miniseries simply titled Princess Sally. During a solo mission in the heart of Robotropolis, Sally Acorn comes into contact with a freedom-fighting skunk named Jeffrey St. John. The two begin working together to try and cripple the schemes of Dr. Robotnik while Sally's freedom fighter trainees tag along. Apologies if that plot description wasn't exactly descriptive. I usually hate it when all comic channels do is describe the plot in excruciating detail and call that a retrospective. It's actually really cool that Sally was the first character from Archie Sonic to receive this sort of treatment, and I think there was a lot of potential to tell a tight 3-issue long story about her. This miniseries was just coming off another Sally-centric storyline that delved into more serious territory. In one of the earliest instances of the comic series becoming more serious, we had a 3-part story told over the course of Sonic issues 17, 18, and the In Your Face special, which saw some really emotional moments with Sally, and allowed her to be an actual character, rather than the nagging girlfriend she had been depicted as up to that point. The door was wide open to push this character into new, exciting territory, and this should have been a major leap for her. Sadly, though, I think this is the worst miniseries out of the bunch that we'll be looking at today. Some positives. The art and presentation here are really good, done by Art Mulwiney. When it comes to nailing down the aesthetic of the Sonic Sat-AM cartoon, Art is the best to ever do it, probably because he actually worked on the show as a storyboard artist. The backgrounds all feel right, the character designs feel basically lifted from that show, and the page layouts are engaging. Each story opens with a 2-page spread to really set the scale of the whole story. 2-page spreads weren't really done in the comic up to that point, so this feels like a deliberate attempt to push the comic into more action-adventure territory. Some panels even go without dialogue, only sometimes accompanied by sound effects. The story was handled by longtime Archie Sonic writer Ken Penders, along with Mike Kantorich, his often forgotten about writing partner from early Archie Sonic. This is sadly where all of my problems come up. I should make it known that despite Ken's infamous reputation in the Sonic fandom, I actually do like a handful of the earlier stories that he did with Mike. They were genuinely capable of writing fun, all-ages comedy or adventure stories during the early years of the comic, and were also the ones who had begun pushing the comic into more serious territory. They even wrote the In Your Face story I was talking about earlier, which was a massive leap for the book at the time. The basic plot of the overall miniseries isn't too bad of an idea either. Sally trying to expand the ranks of the Freedom Fighters while teaming up with a new group is interesting. Robotnik's plan to build lifelike robots of the Freedom Fighters for spying is a cool and kinda creepy idea. The parts were all there. The biggest problem, though, is the characters. Despite being the title character, Sally Acorn gets almost nothing to do in the series, outside of showing off basic character traits like her leadership skills and tactical side. That stuff is good and should have been shown off, but when it comes to emotional explorations of the character, this book is seriously lacking. Like I had mentioned earlier, up until Sonic issue 17, Sally had been depicted mostly as just Sonic's girlfriend and kind of a nag, with that only really changing in the In Your Face special. With 3 full issues, this should have been a perfect time to flesh the character out and really make her a 3-dimensional character, but they don't do anything with her. Sally just leads the team, beats Robotnik, and heads back home the knothole. Sure, she's being depicted closer to her characterization in the Sat-AM show, which is good, but that's just not enough here. All she really gets is a new love interest with... oh god, Jeffrey St. John. If you know anything about Archie Sonic, then you know who this character is and what he's famous for. Let's just get it out of the way. Even ignoring Ken's nonsensical lore dumps from Twitter about the character, Jeffrey is just kind of an unlikable asshole throughout the whole mini. He's just constantly smug and acts superior about everything, and as a love interest, he basically has zero chemistry with Sally. The ending where they kiss just kinda comes out of nowhere and just feels like a forced attempt at a love triangle that ended up being one of the worst subplots in early Archie Sonic. I like his design, he's definitely in line with the Sat-AM show, and it would be later tweaked to better fit the game's art style, but Jeffrey would pretty much remain remain as one of the most unlikable characters in the book until writer Carl Bullers got his hands on him, and he arguably wasn't consistently good until Ian Flynn's run on the series. Sally leading a group of new freedom fighters is an interesting idea, but I think most of these guys kind of suck, honestly. On top of most of them just looking ugly, Arlo Armadillo and Penelope Platypus have almost nothing going on to speak of. They're just kind of there. Actually, I think my favorite new character from this whole thing is Hamlin. In the Archie Sonic fandom, I'm pretty sure Hamlin is one of the most despised characters in the entire comic, but I kind of love him. He's written to be kind of asshole-ish on purpose, but it feels like the most natural characterization in the mini. He'd also go on to have some pretty interesting characterization in issue 197 and later issues of Archie Sonic, so I don't think he's totally worthless. The Princess Sally mini had gone through quite a few different plots before making it to print, one focusing on Sally's mom and one focusing on Sally and Bunny Rabbit, and I can't help but wonder if those would have led to more satisfying and rewarding results. Introducing Sally's mother into the story would have provided some much more emotional drama into the story, and Bunny is just such a likable character that any story would be improved by her presence. The story we got would have been okay if Sally was just more of an established character by that point, but she still needed much more work if they were ever planning on giving her an ongoing series or pushing her more as a character. It really sucks because if there's anyone from Archie Sonic who deserved more good stories from around this time, it was Sally. Archie Comics would take another crack at a Sonic comic spin-off soon after the Princess Sally miniseries, this time focusing on Sonic's little buddy, Tails. Set up in issues 27 through 29 of the main Archie Sonic book and the Sonic Triple Trouble special, this 3-issue miniseries would see Tails setting off from that whole village to try and stop one of Dr. Robotnik's schemes on his own. As the young fox was wanting to prove that he was just as capable as the older freedom fighters, this misadventure would lead to him arriving at the continent of Down Under, where he would help the freedom fighters of that region take on one of Robotnik's sub-bosses, Crocbot. In the end, Tails turns down an offer to join the Down Under freedom fighters in favor of returning back to Knothole, realizing he missed all of his friends and that they were just trying to protect him. This story would take on a much more comedic tone than the Sally miniseries, which makes sense as it was written by Mike Gallagher and penciled by Dave Manek, two of the main creatives from Archie Sonic who focus solely on the more comedic issues of that comic. This comic really doubles down on the comedy, going for a joke in almost every panel and really ramping up the visuals to be as wacky and cartoonish as possible. Early Archie Sonic's humor is really a love it or hate it kind of thing, but I've always found it really charming, and I think it makes for an entertaining read here. This is like one of the funniest panels from early Archie Sonic, and it always makes me laugh. Once again, there's a push for more splash pages and 2-page spreads in this mini, and that's always appreciated. Despite the focus on comedy, there's actually quite a good bit of world building present in this miniseries. We get some of the earliest examples of regional bosses for Robotnik's empire with the fearsome Octobot and the cruel Crocbot. Given what this concept would later evolve into during Ian Flynn's run on the comic, it's really cool to see it here. Giving Robotnik or Eggman a rank of sub-bosses to micromanage his territories does a really good job at selling the scope of his empire. We get what's technically the first appearance of Fiona Fox, albeit a robot version and not the real one who would team up with Scourge, but hey. More freedom fighter teams. I hate the 40 Fathom freedom fighters. I find them incredibly annoying and ugly. We get the Down Under freedom fighters. I actually do like these guys. Their personalities are pretty varied and they have some neat designs. They're all obviously based on animals from Australia, and they have exaggerated features to represent that animal. Call me crazy, but it feels like these guys were also designed more around the game characters than any of the American original characters. I really couldn't tell you what specifically gives me that vibe. Maybe it's the eyes and the use of gloves on almost all of them. Duckbill Platypus literally has recolored Sonic shoes. They're not particularly deep characters, I'll admit, but I like them well enough. I honestly would have been super down if Tails didn't get an ongoing where he stayed on Down Under with these guys. We get one of the first new Echidna characters with Aethar. No, he's not owned by Ken Penders. Ken didn't create every Archie original character, you know. I actually really like the concept of Aethar, an old Echidna who's more in touch with his mystical side. He's also Knuckles' great-grandpa, and he honestly looks the part too. Archie's Echidna characters are often rightfully criticized for having designs that just look like Knuckles in different clothes, but I think Aethar's design genuinely works as an older relative to Knuckles in a way that isn't silly. He's got the Jamaican-colored beads, the dirty tunic, a darker shade of red, and his overall body is more aged than a lot of Echidna characters. I dig him, and it kind of sucks that he wasn't used more effectively in Archie. Aethar actually takes a moment to explain the lore behind the great crater he lives in, which was actually where the floating island originally sat before being moved into the air. He also gives a very condensed version of the early backstory for the Echidnas that was being told over in the main Sonic book, and honestly, when you breeze by it so fast, it honestly isn't too ridiculous. So, okay, this comic has a fun, adventurous tone with a lot of comedy, expands the world by adding in new characters and locations. Sounds like a pretty fun time. And it is. But there's just one teeny tiny issue, and sadly it relates back to the main character again. Now, let me make it clear that I think the way Tails was handled here is much better than how Sally was handled in her miniseries. Tails here actually has a goal that relates to him personally, as he wants to set out and prove himself. He wants to stop the bad guys, sure, but that's not the only motivation, and that immediately puts him over how Sally was characterized in her series. The problem is that after the second issue, Tails takes a major backseat to let the Down Under FFs deal with Crocbot, while he's stuck listening to Aethar for a majority of issue 2 and issue 3. He doesn't even really get to do much against Crocbot in the finale, more so just helping characters fly around so they can get a few blows on Crocbot. This is supposed to be the Tails miniseries. Let him actually do stuff. Sadly, this miniseries wouldn't lead into an ongoing book, and I think that's a shame because I think this would have offered a lot of room for Tails to develop on his own and maybe give the more comedic side of Archie a home while the main Sonic book delved into more serious territory. Now, I don't really know if you could justify that like you could with Knuckles. Tails is known for being Sonic's little buddy, so separating them for long chunks at a time might be a bad idea in the long run, but I think it could have been an interesting experiment. Overall, the Tails miniseries is a very fun, if slightly flawed, comic romp. The last of the main Archie Sonic spin-offs. This one's all about the Red Echidna himself, Knuckles. Knuckles was already being pushed pretty hard by the comic since his first appearance in Sonic issue 13, reappearing in a variety of one-shot specials before finally landing his own miniseries. This miniseries would be given loads of setup, first beginning in the Sonic and Knuckles special and continuing in various issues of the main Sonic book and other one-shot specials. It is quite a bit of setup too, starting with the kidnapping of the Chaotix by the mysterious Archimedes and following Knuckles as he attempts to find them on the floating island, with the Echidna pondering about his father and the history of the island and its Echidna population. This all leads into the miniseries, where Knuckles finds his friends and Archimedes, who is actually just testing Knuckles and meant no harm to anyone. There is one guy who means harm though, Enerjack, an ancient Echidna scientist who went mad with power after absorbing the abilities of a Chaos Emerald, now back for revenge and ready to claim Mobius. This leads to Knuckles teaming up with Archimedes to try and stop Enerjack and save his friends. I'm going to be very upfront and say that I was expecting this miniseries to be fairly mediocre this time around, as I have read it before and never had many strong feelings about it. I mean, it's a Knuckles miniseries written by Ken Penders and Mike Kantorvich going into Echidna lore. If you know even a little bit about Archie Sonic, you know that Ken's Echidna lore is one of the most infamous things about the comic, and it very much deserves that reputation. This series really had everything going against it in my mind, but I wanted this reread to be my most observant yet, and I really wanted to take a lens to this story and give it an honest, fair shot. I did just that, and I really enjoyed it. Way more than I thought I would, honestly. My biggest worry was that Knuckles was going to be made useless in his own miniseries, that the Echidna lore was going to take center stage, and Knuckles would be pushed aside in favor of new characters being introduced. This is exactly what Ken would do in a lot of his later stories, and really the big theme of this whole video was going to be that the main characters had so little agency in their own books. And to some extent, it is a little true, but I think the focus on the Echidna history here is used just to expand on Knuckles' world, and the events from those flashback segments directly tie into events happening in the present. The comic's villain, Enerjack, is sort of meant to parallel Knuckles in a way. After his plans to bring the floating island down back to Mobius was denied by the rest of the Echidna Society, he shut himself off from everyone and decided that he was the only one who could fix things. Knuckles started out much the same way, only wanting to be left alone so he could do his job of guarding the island, but over the course of his various appearances, he slowly begins to trust others who would be willing to help him, and would just be his friends. Really, this miniseries acts more as a conclusion to Knuckles' arc rather than just being a standalone mini, and I don't think you would really get that if you just read it on its own. Going back to Enerjack, I love him here. Dimitri isn't nearly as intimidating as Knuckles Jack in late issues of Archie Sonic, but he's such a ham in this series. He basically acts like a 1960s Doctor Doom and devours the scenery whenever possible. He's still a credible threat too. They make it clear that this dude is meant to be taken seriously, and he's a pretty intimidating villain for around this time. And like I said, I like that he directly ties into Knuckles' arc, so he has a thematic purpose in the story as well. I think the really big issue with the Echidna history here is the presentation. I don't think any of the more sci-fi elements being shown here are necessarily ridiculous in concept. I think it really boils down to how all of the Echidnas just look like Knuckles in different clothes. It's just ridiculous to think of Knuckles the Echidna from Sonic the Hedgehog concerning himself with astronomy. The stuff here is pretty easy to follow, it's just that all of the character designs look ridiculous. Knuckles' father, Locke, also appears here, and I don't much care for his design either. Now, him looking like Knuckles isn't the issue at all, for obvious reasons, but those clothes are pretty bland looking. Much happier with the redesign he received in the Return to Angel Island storyline. Speaking of Locke, I kinda don't like how he robs Knuckles of a victory against Enerjack. Granted, I don't know how the hell Knuckles would fight this guy without help, but Locke intervenes in a way that feels kinda cheap. I guess Knuckles won the moral victory against Enerjack, and Locke just helped him with the physical battle, but I don't know. What are some other issues? The Chaotix are kind of underdeveloped. They make their first real appearance in the Knuckles Chaotix special. Yeah, no duh. And after the first two stories, they're immediately captured by Archimedes. If the comic wanted to have an ending all about Knuckles learning to accept people into his life, I think we needed more time of him interacting with the Chaotix for it to stick. Let's go back to being positive for a bit. The presentation here is stellar. Art Bawini once again returns to do pencils, and I think these are some of the best looking issues he ever did for the comic. Characters look real nice, backgrounds can be very detailed, and I really enjoy a lot of the panel layouts here. Some of these recap sections are handled extremely well, like the first one, being told across the floor that Knuckles is walking on and being set in an angle. They use the page space to tell the story in a lot of interesting ways, and I think that's pretty neat to see in a Sonic comic from so long ago. I also love Spaz's work here. He did the covers and a few interior pieces, and they all look great. I think they nailed the right tone for this series too. It leans hard on the adventure genre, and I think that's a perfect pick for any Knuckles comic, honestly. If Ken had to rip anything off, I'm glad he did Indiana Jones this time. Oh, and Lion King too. There you go. So, yeah, this is honestly a pretty good miniseries. Our main character has a strong focus, we get some cool world building and a cool new villain, and some really nice presentation. I don't know if I'd like this one more than the Tails miniseries, but if I had to look at them objectively, I think I'd be comfortable with calling Knuckles the winner. So, that's all three miniseries. We had some good ones and we had a bad one. Maybe you'll want to check these out for yourself, or maybe you would prefer something a little more modern and closer to the video games. Don't worry, I got you covered. For Tails, I can either tell you to go read the OG Tails Mini and all its setup collected in Sonic Select Volume 8, or I can point you to the Tails Adventure arc from Sonic Universe, told across issues 17 through 20. It's a really fun storyline written by Ian Flynn and penciled by Tracy Yardley, adapting events from the Tails Adventure video game, with Bunny, Rabon, and Antoine tagging along for the fun. It even addresses Tails' inactiveness in earlier Archie stories, allowing him to drive the action for once. For Knuckles, I can recommend the Knuckles Return storyline from Sonic Universe issues 9 through 12, the Great Chaos Caper and Total Eclipse from Sonic Universe issues 63 through 70, and the Shattered storyline from Sonic Universe issues 87 through 90, all written by Ian Flynn and mostly penciled by Tracy Yardley, with Adam Bryce Thomas handling the art for Shattered. Sally's a little trickier. She's basically the second main character from Ian Flynn's whole Archie run, so she doesn't really have any specific stories to check out, but I can at least recommend a few. Sonic issues 213 and 214, the Genesis storyline, Sonic issues 225 to 230, and Spark of Life from Sonic Universe issues 71 through 74. Hopefully you'll check some of those out. They're all very good. And I don't really have a lot left to say here. If you watched the whole video, thank you for watching, and just have a nice rest of your day.